Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the GML basic tutorials. One of the most important things I find with GML is the if statement. It's going to be like one of the most used things in GML apart from variables, just because you can do so much with it. So I'll be taking you through that today, and also I'll be taking you through keyboard functions, so you'll be able to check to see if a key is pressed, and also mouse checking function, so you'll be able to check for mouse buttons as well. Okay, so I'll use the object drawer again from the last part, just using the same project. And I just go into the create event. So we're going to use a function again and a variable to get this done. So what we're going to do at first is I'm going to make a variable, and I'll call that just box, and I'll put that on that line, and then I'll set that to false. False is the same as writing 0, and true is the same as writing 1, so the 0 or 1. And we're going to use that and check for a key. So if we're pressing like space or something like that, and then if we are, we'll draw a box to the screen. Yeah, so so we've got that variable there called box. We set that to false. So in the draw event, go in here, and this is where we use the if statement. So it works as if you're asking a question. So I might say, if there are 10 apples, go to the store and get more. So it's a lot like doing that. So we write if. So we're pretty much just checking to see if something is true. So we're asking the computer or the program if something is happening or if something isn't happening, and then with that we can decide whether or not to do something. Excuse me. Okay, so in this case we want to know if that variable is true or not. So at the moment we've set it to false, but we want to know if it's true. So we write if box. Now you could leave it like that and that would work, but I always just write if box equals true or if box equals false. So I find it makes it easier to read and makes it a bit more definite, I guess. Like, yeah, I can't really explain it, but that's just how I do it. But yeah, if you wanted, you could just write if box and that would work, but I'm going to write if box equals true. Okay, so that there is our if statement done. But as you can see, it says unexpected end of code reached down the bottom here. So the reason it's doing that is because with an if statement it needs something to do if it's true. So to control what it does when it's true, you use curly braces. So you have an opening curly brace, and then you have a closing curly brace, and anything in between those curly braces will only be done if that statement is true. So if box equals true, then do whatever. So that thing that we tell it to do, that will only be done if box is equal to true. If it's equal to false, it'll just skip right past it and continue with the rest of the code. So now we need to tell it what to do. So if box equals true, we want to draw a box to the screen. So I'm going to take you through a new function, or two new functions here. So last time I showed you drawing text, and I told you that the default color was black. What if you wanted to draw with a different color? For that you use this function. So you write draw set color, and you have your opening and closing brackets to contain your arguments. And in between those, if you look down at arguments down the bottom, you see it says col. That stands for color. Okay, and then you write your color. So color, like there's a bunch of inbuilt variables for colors. So if you put in C underscore and just leave it like that, then you'll see in this drop down list it comes up with a bunch of different colors. I'm just going to write C red, and that will give us just plain red. Now remembering in functions you don't use spaces or capitals, use underscores. If you use a capital in a variable, make sure that when referencing to that variable somewhere else in the code you use that capital again. GML is case sensitive, unlike HTML where it doesn't really matter. If I was to write capital BOX here, then that wouldn't work because in the create event we used all lowercase letters. Okay, so so draw set color, C red, and that will set the color to red. That's global. So for everything in the game, that color is now set to red. So if you were to draw text in this object, then that would be black, and then you set the color to red, and then another object was drawing text after you've already set the color to red, then the text that other object draws will be red. Excuse me. And that's just because you've set the color to red in this object, and that's global, so it applies to everything. So we set the color to red. Now we want to draw a box. So you write draw. Draw rectangle. Just like that. And then that's the function. So then we need our brackets to contain our arguments. Okay, if you look down the bottom, you've got x1, y1, x2, and y2, and then outline. So x1 and y1 is the first x and 1 where you want the box to be drawn. So let's say top left of the screen, and then we can draw down to the bottom left of the screen and just cover the whole screen in this red box. Okay, so because we want top left, we go 0 for x1 and 0 for y1, which is the exact top left and top right of the screen. Then we want to go to the top right and the bottom right. No, not top right, sorry. We're going to go the far right and like the far bottom of the screen, so the bottom right corner. There we go. Okay, so we could easily look at the settings on the room properties and just get the x and y from there, like the width and the height of the room. But what if you like wanted to change the room later on, like the room width or height? There's two variables which make things a lot simpler when it comes to doing that. That is room width and room height. So you write room width, remember using underscores, not spaces, and room height, just like that. And those will give you your bottom right corner. So they're basically variables that just hold the width and the height of the room in pixels. And then do we want it to be outlined or not for the outline argument? We don't want it to be an outline, which means it would just be a solid color. So we write false. Okay, so that will draw our rectangle in the color red. But as I said before, red, like setting the color to red makes it global. So even this text that we draw up here is from the last tutorial where we drew the word text. When we draw that, that will now be in red. So to draw it in black for the first step, and then if box is true, it'll set the color to red, and then it'll keep drawing it in red after that. But let's say we didn't want it to do that, we need to set the color back to black. So beneath that, you just write draw set color C black. Now GML runs from top to bottom with the code, so it'll run first line, and then it'll keep running through the lines until it gets to the 7th line. So you might be worried that this draw rectangle is going to be drawn in black because you set the color to black there. Don't, because we set the color to red there, then we draw the rectangle, so we draw the rectangle in red, and then we draw the color in black. No, we don't draw the color, sorry, we set the color back to black. That was my bad. Okay, so that's it for the draw event. So we start off by checking if box is true, Then if it is, we draw color red, draw a rectangle, and then we set the color back to red. Oh, black. Wow. Okay. So now we're going to go into the step event, and we're going to check if the player is pressing space or not. So add event, and go to the step event. Now both the draw and step event run by default 30 times a second. So it goes through all of your code 30 times a second by default. It's a thing in the settings tab of the room, just here. Speed. So you can see that's set to 30. If I was to set that to 60, then it would run 60 times a second. Basically, it's like your frame rate. So if you have a timer or something, like, it uses that instead of like seconds to kind of get that, but I'll show you that later. Okay. So in the step event, I just dragged in a bit of code then. We want to check if the player is pressing space or not. So it's pretty simple. You just write if for your if statement, space, keyboard, check, and that's it. Keyboard check, and then that's the function. So we want our opening and closing brackets. Don't use that colon dashy thing. I seriously cannot remember for the life of me what that thing is called. But don't use that. Okay, so that is for ending lines. For example, after a variable, you like end it, and it kind of like cuts off that little bit. If you use that in an if statement, you'll get an error because the game maker will think that's like the end, and it won't get it. So don't use those after an if statement. Okay, so keyword check. So we then want to check which key is pressed. So the two ways of checking keys, and they both have to be used. You can't use like one or the other. For your arrow keys and shift and control, alt, space, all your like F1 to F12 and all that, that is VK. And then like the key you want. So you might have VK alt or VK left or right or up or down for the arrow keys. In this case we want VK space. So those are like your control keys, I guess. But what if you wanted to check for using a letter? You don't use VK for that. Checking a letter, you use another function for. So you write ORD. I don't know what it stands for. That's just how it is. Then because that is another function, we need the opening and closing brackets again. Don't worry that that is inside another function. You can use functions inside other functions. That's perfectly normal. Okay, so if you look down the bottom now while you're in between the brackets after the ORD function, you'll see it has character there. So now we have to give it a letter to use. So let's say we wanted to check for the W key. So you were setting up like a game controlled with W, S, A, and D. You want to check for W. So you just write W. Now if you look at that, that looks fine, yeah, or W, whatever. That won't work. And the reason that won't work is because GameMaker will think W is a variable. And to stop GameMaker from thinking that, we put quotation marks on either side of that, which turns it into a string. But we want that because now it doesn't look like a variable and GameMaker won't get confused. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but you have to use the capital when using the ORD function, so it has to be a capital letter. I don't know why. If I did, I'd let you know, but I don't, so sorry about that one. But yeah, it has to be a capital for whatever reason. Yeah, so as a function, so if keyboard check or W, but I'll take it back to space just because that's what we want to check. So but just remember, for checking for letters, it's ORD, open bracket, quotation mark, whatever letter you want as a capital, quotation mark, close bracket. Okay, so then we're checking for space though, so we want VK space. Okay, so now we'll use our opening and closing curly braces. Now it doesn't matter where you put these really, so I've put mine there. Just that's where I put them. But you could have it there. You could have them both up on the line like that, so you could have them both on the same line and put all your code in there. Doesn't matter. It'll work either way. Okay. So if keyboard check VK space, we want to do something. So we've got that box variable set to false. But when the keyboard, when your player is holding down space, we are going to set that to true. So if keyboard check VK space, then box equals true. That's it. So what that'll do is it'll check if we're holding down space, and then it'll set box to true, which means it'll start drawing a rectangle. But what about when the player lets go? That box is going to stay set to true because we haven't given it a way of changing back. So what we can do now is use what is called the else statement. And basically it's a lot like using a question again. So if you've got 10 apples, go to the store. If you don't have 10 apples, then you're running out of apples, you're going to have to deal with it. So the whole if you don't thing, so it's like if you have 10 apples, go to the store, else, like if you don't have 10 apples, then do something else. So it's if keyboard check VK space, else, so if keyboard isn't pressed, so if space isn't pressed, then we want to do what's inside those curly braces. So that's how if statements work. So you've got if keyboard check VK space, so if the space key is being held down, then box equals true. However, if it's not being held down, then do whatever is in the else statement. So we want to set box back to false. So box equals false. That's it. So that will check for the space key and set box to true if it's being pressed, and then if it's not, it'll set it back to false. Now there are other keyboard check functions as well, so that checks for a key being held down, but you can also use keyboard check pressed, as you can see there, and that'll check for the press of a key, or you can check keyboard check release, and then that would check for when you release a key. So it's a lot like using the add events things here. So you've got in here you've got keyboard for all your keyboard check functions there, or you've got key press, or you've got key release in there. So it's a lot like using that, except you're writing it as code instead. Okay, but yeah, that'll do it, and it should work. Now I've already got my object in there from the last part, so I'm good to just run mine. However, if you don't have your object in the room already, just put that in before you run it. Okay, so I'll run that, and let's hope everything works. Okay, so here you just have text being drawn there. That's some from the last tutorial. So if I press space, red box, I release space, box is gone. So as you can see, that works. So they're just drawing a red box on the screen when space is being pressed. Now an easy way to do that would just to check straight off if space is being pressed or not. So I'll show you that as well. Okay, so just X that away and go to the draw object again. Now I'm going to take away this step code, so I'm just going to right click on that and hit delete event and hit yes, and go to the create, and I'll take away that box variable as well. You might be wondering, why didn't I just do it this way in the first place? It's just because this way I can show you how to do more. Okay, so yeah, back to the draw event where we're drawing our box. As you can see, we've got if box equals true. We're going to take that away, and we're going to go if keyboard check VK space. Now that shortens it down a lot, and it will do the same thing. So if space is being pressed, then do that. You don't have to have it so the keyboard is being checked only in the step event. Things like draw set color and draw rectangle, they have to be used in the draw event. Just because you're drawing to the screen, then that's what the draw event is designed for. Okay, so I'll tick that off and hit run again, and there we go. So if I press space, red box, release space, red box is gone. So as you can see, in a lot less code we can do the same thing. It might come to a lot of situations like that where you've done something one way but you could have done it like way faster the other way. It's just, you learn from experience on what you can do. For the people watching these tutorials, don't just like watch them and then wait for a new part to come out. Just experiment with what I show you. That's the way I learned. I had a PDF file. I can't remember who or where I got it from. If I did, I'd probably link you to it because it was a really great PDF file. But yeah, I looked at what was in there. I just experimented around with that, and from that I learned new things. So, for example, your keyboard check function could be used like in so many different situations. Like you might want to make a game where the player can move around the screen. You use the keyboard check and move them around if it's pressed. Like keyboard check is one of the most common used functions, I think, just because you're checking for controls. But yeah, another thing you can do, and I've done this a lot in my other tutorials, is save a key into a variable, make it easier to change that key later on if you wanted to. So to do that, we want a variable. So in this case, I'm just going to use the variable box again. So box, I'm just going to type that in the if keyword check box. Now we haven't declared that yet, so we've got to go back and do that now. Otherwise, if we run it, we'll get an error. Wow, an error. Okay, so yeah, we'll go back and check that. So we've got box there. Then go back to the create event. What the hell just happened there? Minimize itself for some reason. Okay, and then we'll write box equals, and then we just write the key. So vk space, so you might write or w or vk right. Any of those keys, you just do it like that, and that will save that key to that variable. Tick that off and hit run. Okay, and then if we hit space, same thing happens. So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways to do one thing when it comes to GML. Okay, so I'll get rid of that variable and I'll go back to the draw event. I'll just show you one more function and then I'll have to end of the tutorial because it's already gone for over 20 minutes. Okay, so say you want to check for the mouse, it's just the same as keyboard check, except you write mouse check instead. It's mouse check button. So you can't just write mouse check, it's going to be mouse check button or mouse check button pressed or mouse check button released. Okay, and that is a function, so we need our opening and closing brackets on the end, and then we need to put in our arguments, which is our button. So all the mouse buttons are written using MB right for the right mouse button, or in this case we're going to use the left mouse button, so left. You could also write down middle, so MB, and if you can see here, so you've got MB any, MB left, MB middle, MB none, or MB right. So any is like any key on the mouse, left is the left mouse button, middle is when you click down the scrolly wheel thing, and none is when you aren't pressing any of those, and right is the mouse button. So we're going to use left mouse button in this. So just put in MB left to that, so mouse check button, MB left. Now take that off and run that, and instead of pressing space, I should just be able to click, and the box will appear. Okay, so click, and there it is. So that's just using the left mouse button instead of space. Okay, that's all I'm showing you for this tutorial. Again, if you liked it, found it helpful, just hit that like button, just so that it just gives me like an idea of how many people this tutorials are actually helping out. And if you want to see more, hit like as well. Subscribe if you want to, that's up to you. And if you want, like the Facebook page. If you do have any questions on this tutorial, just leave it in the comment section below and I'll answer that as good as I can. If it's a good question and I've like missed something in the video, I'll add like a question and answer thing into the description. for any of those good questions. If you want to request a tutorial, that's fine. I do requests, so just either send me a message. Please don't leave it in the comment section. That's specifically for questions on this video, and you can either send me a message on YouTube, or if you go to the Facebook page, you can send me a message through that instead. And that's probably preferred if you go through the Facebook page, but it's up to you. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time, and I hope I helped you out.